mission, and they express those through a set of practices and things they do and they don't do. They have a series of plant-based products and manage a whole set of brands that would be familiar to people like Silk and So Delicious. And they also continue to be active in animal agriculture and do that in a way that's responsible and sustainable for those practices. And so, that's an example of one of the ways that we as consumers can start to look at the company level practices that sit behind. Over time, though, you're going to have the ability to look very closely at sort of labels. And again, we use a series of certifications that matter to some folks. Non-GMO Project is a great example. That's a crosscut, and it gets at not only what's the approach to bringing genetically modified ingredients forward, but also a set of cultural practices that relate to how things are farmed. Consumers are going to want to find things that matter to them. So I always encourage people, find your entry point. There is no right entry point. It isn't organic. It isn't fair trade. It'll be all of those things for different folks. But find something that's your entry point, whether it's a brand or a label claim or a certification. Learn about that, and that'll lead you on a journey that drives you to the types of food choices that matter to you, given who you are and where you're situated and what you're trying to achieve.
Great. Thank you so much, Seth and Mark, for your responses. With that, I'll go ahead and transition to questions from the audience. Just give me a minute to pull them up. This is an interesting one. Question for Seth, and I get this question oftentimes myself. The meat industry uses a large amount of plastic to package their products. With your work being so planet focused, how do you reduce the requirement for plastic?
Yeah, well, we always are going to try to lightweight as much as we can, as much for environmental reasons as for cost reasons. We've managed to avoid using styrofoam or styrene, which it was a good step. But we also have to make sure we are presenting a product that is safe and legally compliant with all the regulations for the consumer. So we're not going to be able to be a zero packaging company. But we have, we're proud of the fact, like on our sausage, we did move to a compostable tray for that product. But I would say in general, don't expect the plant-based industry to be. We should be current with the leading practices, but we're probably not going to be out there taking risks that a meat company would not take, because we have to make sure, the worst thing that could happen is we have a product that ends up not being safe, somebody gets sick or dies as a result of our product. So we have to be at least as cautious as the meat industry in that regard. And I'll just put it in a larger context, because this was an issue at Honest Tea as well, where we're here organic and make regenerative practices, but we're selling single-use bottles, obviously recycled, but single-use bottles. And this is the inevitable contradiction that arises when you have a commitment to sustainability. The definition of sustain is to uphold life, and you operate in a consumer economy. The definition of consume is to devour and destroy. And so you're automatically in that contradiction, and you do your best to live within it, but you're not going to get to 100% sustainability.
Right. Great. Thank you, Seth. Appreciate it. And for Dr. Changé, how do you feel about the growth in talking about regenerative agriculture? Is it too confusing for buyers and consumers to understand the nuance of agroecology versus regenerative in general? Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think to a degree, consumers are being flooded by a lot of marketing tags. But I would say this: the regenerative movement, I think, has a very solid base. It's very similar to the agroecology movement. I would even say, and I've had this debate, and I've been a part of some think tanks for the regenerative movement. It's missing some of the indigenous Black and people of color that the agroecology movement kind of centralized around. But I do see the movement towards integrating the movement. And do I think that it may be too much for the consumer? Yes, I think we need to kind of rethink how we are marketing this. And I do have an issue kind of with a regenerative label, or even a certification that's being forwarded now by a few people in the movement. I think it may be going a little bit too far, but that still remains to be seen. That's my personal perspective.
Great, thank you. And Katie, this next question is for you. Thousands of people now live in senior care retirement communities, and while healthy food and plant-based food should appeal to this population, there's often resistance and reliance on comfort foods for people in their 80s and 90s. How would you approach the food suppliers on this issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that really it just comes down to having a limited amount of time and resources, and so we focus on the lowest hanging fruit. So, right now we're focusing on tech companies, especially large and progressive tech companies that have made really aggressive carbon reduction commitments, and so we're trying to get these leading institutions. Also, my colleague Alana does the same type of work with universities that I'm doing with corporations, and we've gotten Harvard's Office for Sustainability has signed on. She's working with, talking with other leading Ivy League institutions. And so we're starting with the lowest hanging fruit. That's also, the institutions that really set an example that the rest of the culture and the rest of the institutions follow. And so in that way, we can demonstrate that this is really best practice. And then we can go to others and say, hey, you're falling behind by not doing this. So, while we want plant-based food to be the default and to be accessible to everybody, unfortunately, retirement communities, I agree, are one of the harder audiences for a variety of reasons. So we're starting with the ones that are the easiest to transition, and then hoping that from there it will spread across society.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. And Mark, this next question is for you. Is there any country or region of the world that has emerged as particularly significant in its potential contribution to the plant-based food movement?
I wanted to highlight three that have played three very different roles, just to show you again how this is such a global movement. The first is one we work in, which is India, where the majority of the eaters are plant-based, and even the whole conversation around plant-based. I was just in India 2 weeks ago. Sort of people have been scratching their heads when you talk about burgers. I mean, there's plant-based breads that are high protein, that number in the dozens. There are more pulses and legumes consumed in more parts of the country than we have beans on the shelf, in an average American supermarket. And so many of those foods, like dosas, are starting to make their way into global culinary. And so it's a really exciting time to look to really large and diverse and eclectic sources of food, particularly here in the U.S., for inspiration, because we don't have to necessarily go find our favorite factor, or form factor like a burger or a beverage we know. We might explore and experience plant-based foods in entirely new ways. So India is one example. A second that's nearby that's doing something very different is Singapore. Singapore is open for business as a laboratory, and it's really saying, it wants to innovate not only on the science and technology side with new forms of meat alternatives, some of which will be cellular, some of which will be plant-based around processing and brands, but they're cracking open food labeling and allowing for innovators to hang a shingle in Singapore and help make what's a very small country, a center of a lot of plant-based innovation. The third is the United Kingdom. The UK has an interesting distinction in that it has the highest percentage of vegetarians of any Western country, and it also has a deep integration around both heritage and heirloom agriculture for animals and plants. Some of that grew out of some practices and some experience in the 1980s and 1990s, particularly with mad cow disease. But it's also rooted in a very unique climate and a series of cultural traditions in which they've begun to take things that are rooted in a Western culture, integrate them with a global culture as Britain is, and you're going to see again an increasing intersection of consumer trends that reflect that from here but global citizen point of view. So those are three specific examples I think we could draw inspiration from, and lots of other places in the world where there's a vibrant conversation around plant-based.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And Seth, I think I will direct the next question to you. This is a topic that comes up multiple times a week at Berkeley, and there's so much disagreement around this, even within the plant-based community. What role do you see lab-grown meat playing in a more sustainable food future?
Well, first of all, I'll just say the problems we have with the meat industry in terms of their impact are so colossal that I welcome all potential solutions. That said, I've chosen to make my bet on plant-based as the most promising because, well, first of all, we are seeing success in the marketplace. I think it is yet to be proven that cellular-based ag can work. And I would have, looking at it from an outsider, if you told me you could find a way to replicate cells, the first application I thought would be commercially viable would be to do it for human cells, for skin, or other cells that humans need. And that hasn't really succeeded commercially. So I'm not 100% convinced it'll work at scale. And then there will be a marketing challenge as well. I talk about the meat industry providing resistance. I mean, I think they'll be insisting on how do you label this, and so will the consumer, is it cultured meat, cell-based meat, and I guess so there'll be some challenges there. I think the other thing though is that if we look at the pace at which plant-based has improved, and as I mentioned, the Beyond Burger just launched 5 years ago, and already the burger we're launching, we have in the market now is dramatically better than what we had 5 years ago. If you assume another 5 years, we're going to continue to improve at the same rate. By the time cellular ag is, ready to go into the marketplace, the competitive landscape will be much more competitive as well. So I honestly don't wish, I wish them well, but I also don't lose sleep over them as a threat in terms of where I think the opportunity and growth lie.
Great. Thank you so much, Seth. And this next question.
Sorry, one last thing to add is that to the extent people have health concerns about animal-based meat, the cultured meat doesn't alleviate those concerns, right? You're still going to have, whether it's cholesterol or saturated fat, you're still going to get those. And whereas, plant-based has the ability to basically craft it without those deficiencies, replicated animal cells will not.
Right. And I guess the area where they might have the advantage is the hygiene of the facilities where they're making the food. Mm-hmm. Is not the same as a slaughterhouse, but yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, Seth. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And this next question, I will actually leave open to any of the panelists who might be interested in answering. Is factory farming politically well connected on both state and federal levels? Are there any examples of active sabotage by the factory farming or meat industry, either legislatively or informationally, of plant-based initiatives?
Well, I talked earlier about, efforts to restrain our ability to use label, call something a sausage. But my point of view is if you could have a salmon sausage, why couldn't you have a plant-based sausage? And then, there have been ads by an entity called the Center for Consumer Freedom, which is just a front for the meat lobby, where they'll try to talk about all the ingredients in our product. And so that's just, again, a large entrenched interest trying to protect itself.
Great.
I'll say, we also need to distinguish between farmers and farming. There are a lot of farmers whose livelihoods depend on managing a lot of complexity of the weather and a changing climate, complexity of pressures on the resources they use, like water and soil, complexities of regulation and accessing markets, and competition. It's coming from all over the planet. And so let's recognize that there's a reason that farmers need to band together, and farmers can be a great source of change and good. We've got a farm bill that's up this week that's trying to introduce some new resources for farmers. These include being able to farm and be compensated for the carbon they sequester on all of our behalf, and to have incentives to do more of that. It also has to do with creating more diversity in the different farmscapes in which they work. Because to date, the major incentives that lead to industrial farming have more to do with what happens after a crop has been raised, the cost of the crop insurance you can get, the ability to trade your commodity. And that leads us to producing lots of the same animals and plants with very little variety. So I'd argue that there's a huge role to address the role of farmers in our farming system and to create more connection points for them, particularly again with a lot of our firms and a lot of our efforts that are going to be upending this system. right? There are a lot of soybean farmers who would love to earn more and also contribute to sustainable crop. So let's think about how we enlist them and moving away from practices that might have been destructive or been driven into animal agriculture where most soybeans go, and finding new markets and new places for them to have a more sustainable livelihood that also serves our needs, in the planetary context a lot better.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Mark and Seth, for your input. And I know we are wrapping up. We're about to end our Q&A time. I don't know, Katie or Dr. Shange, if you have any last words or that you'd like to share with the audience.
Oh, sure. I would just really encourage anyone who's interested in bringing more plant-based options to your school, to your workplace, to your place of worship, your community group, to get in touch. We have a variety of resources that we make available, and everything is provided for free. We're a nonprofit, so I will put my email and our website in the chat, and really hope to hear from folks. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Dr. Shange.
No, I would just like to thank you all for the opportunity to come and speak, and to the audience. Just continue to support small and limited resource farms, and hopefully we can support the comeback of the small farmer in America.
Great, thank you. Seth or Mark, did you have any final words?
I'll just build on what Katie said. It's a really important point. The first, people, you were asking what things should students learn or what they should do. The first thing they should do is try to influence their immediate circle of friends or family about plant-based foods, because that's where it all starts. And our name, Eat the Change, is a very intentional one. It's about accountability and empowerment. And if you care about the planet and our impact on it, the single biggest impact anybody can have on a daily basis is changing what they eat, and obviously then by extension the ability to change other folks' practices as well. And so it's a great place to start.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'll just close by saying thank you for hosting us today, and also to thank the Presidio community. It's really exciting to see this kind of energy, bringing people who work across very disparate parts of our food and agriculture system. Folks like the four of us aren't always on the same conversation. We're often in very different conversations. And so keep doing it, Presidio, right? Bringing people across these sectors who are looking at different aspects of really important issues like plant-based together.
Great, yeah. Thank you all so much just for bringing your unique perspectives from different parts of the plant-based food sector and just for covering the wide breadth of topics that we discussed today. I really appreciate all of your time and insight today.
Wonderful. And thank you again to our audience for coming. We really appreciate it. Our next Presidio Presents event will be in January. So please sign up for our Presidio newsletter or follow us on social media to find out what our next talk will be. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and enjoy some plant-based food in the near future. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, I'm going to check on one other talk. Hello to the viewers and the replay viewers.
Recording in progress.
So, as one of my professors used to say, the foreground, this spit of beach, kind of slingshots us out into the distance, you know? And we might say very casually, like in a scenic overlook, or just thinking about a lot of things for which the word distance might apply, it's over there. It's way over there. If you look, it's way over, look just to the, you know, way over there. But I think what Gifford is interested in, and I just love this about him, is the relation, not the difference, but the relation between near and far. What is so far from us and yet connected to us by, as it were, the same spit of land, you know? What is intimate about the horizon? Why does the horizon shift with our own bodily position, as though, which of course it does, as though, you know, the very circumference of the earth depends upon our subjective movements, you know? And what is it about something that is so far away that is so urgent, so pertinent to us? And so if we come back to our painting and think about it, the distance is certainly in play there, but so of course is the light, you know, and there's no question that that light is a heavenly light. Gifford, when he died at age 57, Sanford himself, you know, on his deathbed, he was telling people, and this is in a letter from a friend, that there's no question he'll be in heaven. And, you know, that kind of serene assurance about an afterlife is in his pictures too. So that light, that suffusing, irradiating light, which makes a heaven on earth and makes indeed, tends to kind of collapse the distinction between the sky and the ground, right, is enough to suggest that in addition to the distance, this painting speaks to the presence of the otherworldly, or the departed, let's say, in our here and now, and that part of the privacy, the soul, the inwardness, all of these things that I was talking about that Gifford is meditating on and that I'm meditating about tonight have to do with this mysterious connectivity between who is here and who is not, who is nearby and who is far away, and what are the mystic avenues of pain that connect us, as well as of fellow feeling and kind of gorgeous, fragile love. And if you really sort of peer up almost obscenely, like to forensically up close to this canvas to say the sun, where the sun appears, you know, it's fair to say that the sun appears and it's not appearing. It's kind of a haze, a mist, an atmosphere, as I said, never quite the self-same sun, the identifiable, blithely nameable sun. Oh, that's the sun. Oh, that means that it's God the Father up there. No, it's not that simple. It's sort of bordering on invisibility, or it is invisible.